Hello, and welcome to our 7th installment of One on One with Broadway director, choreographer, and Tony nominee, Larry Fuller.
Hello, all you Facebook musical theater fans out there. Well, if you saw the last installment, you know that I just got up to the point where Mr. Hal Prince had asked me to choreograph his next show on the 20th century. And I was still living in Europe. By that time I was living in Munich. I had moved from Vienna. And I spoke German pretty good at that point. Don't remember hardly any of it anymore. But anyway, yeah, I packed my bags and left Munich and came to New York to do my third Broadway show. The first two I didn't even mention because nobody's ever heard of them. They ran like 3 weeks each. My first one was a show called Blood Red Roses, and that was in 1969. And my second one was a show called That's Entertainment, which was a Dietz and Schwartz kind of songbook musical. It was before the film. But anyway, this was 1977, and we actually, 77? I guess we started in 77, and then it opened in 78. That's right. Anyway, I was in on some of the auditions for that, of course, and I remember when Meryl Streep came in and auditioned on a stage. I think it was the Broadway, but I'm not sure. She sang great. She had just done a Brecht musical, which moved from off-Broadway to Broadway. It was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was similar to Guys and Dolls as far as the plot line. She didn't get it because she didn't have the high C. Comden and Green had written what they described as a comic opera, and they wanted somebody with the operatic top, and Meryl Streep didn't have a high C. So she didn't get it. At that point, I think she had done The French Lieutenant's Woman. I think she'd done the film as well. But she wasn't, internationally known at all. Anyway, another audition I remember was Alan Bates, who wanted to do it, and we auditioned him at Cy Coleman's home, very private. There was just Comden and Green and Cy. Cy played for him, and Hal and me. And of course, it's very hard to audition in somebody's house because you're right on top of them. And he was so nervous. As the saying goes, you could hear the change in his pockets jingling. I mean, he was just so nervous. And he couldn't sing, poor baby, at least not that day. So he didn't get it. John Cullum did, who was absolutely extraordinarily wonderful in it. And of course, Madeline Kahn was the original, with understudied by Judy Kay, who then took it over about 8 weeks after we opened on Broadway. So Hal said to me, Larry, there won't be any dancing in this show. There'll be a lot of staging for you to do, but Comden and Green don't want dancing because they feel it's a comic opera. And I said, oh, okay, I don't care, I'll do it anyway. So I had 4 African-American actors who were playing porters in the first scene, in the opening number on the 20th century, when everybody was getting on the train to go to New York I guess they were getting on the train in New York to go to Chicago or somewhere, California, to do the show out of town before coming in. No, I'm totally wrong. That's not right. Sorry. Memories. People were just getting on the train. Nobody was getting on the train to go do a show anywhere. Lily Garland, who was played by Madeline Kahn, was a big star at that point, who had started out with the encouraged and mentored by Oscar, that was John Cullum, who had been a big Broadway director and fallen on hard times, and she had become a big movie star. So he needed her to star in his next show. They had also had a very torrid love affair, which ended rather badly. So it was all that was the tension in the show. And so first day of rehearsal, I happened to be standing with Hal when Cy Coleman came over to us right at the beginning before we started, and Hal said, well, why don't you take Madeline into the vocal room, Cy, and go over her numbers? And he said, okay, fine. And so Madeline and Cy went to the vocal room, and I started staging the opening number, and Hal was kind of just covering all bases. Anyway, at lunchtime, I happened again to be standing with Hal right after the break for lunch, and Cy came over to us, and Hal said to him, well, how did it go with Madeline? And Cy said, she won't sing above a G. And Hal said, what? I mean, we hired her not only for her comic ability, but because she had the high C's and all that. Well, she said she can't sing above a G. She can't do it 8 times a week. It'll kill her voice. And Hal said, well, we've got to find a way to work around this somehow. So what they ended up doing was, Madeline, when she felt in good voice, would do the high C endings. There were, I think, certainly 2, maybe 3 numbers where she had to go way up there. And when she didn't feel in such good voice, she would do an alternate ending. And I don't know whether the number was a G or what it was, but it certainly wasn't a high C. So that's kind of the compromise we reached. And I was staging the opening number, and finally I got it done. And you know, the 4 porters were a kind of focus in the number, because everybody else was just a kind of crowd getting on the train. And Hal took a look at the opening number, and he said, good job, Larry. Now make the porters tap dance. And I said, really? Can I do that? Can I make them tap dance? Because I wasn't supposed to do any dancing. And I said, and he said, yes. And I said, oh, great. So I went to work on the porters, where none of them had been auditioned for tap. And 2 of them did tap, and 2 of them had never tapped a step in their life. And so my poor assistant, Buddy Tugello, every single moment he got, he had him over in the corner going over these steps. They weren't very difficult, but for people who didn't tap, it wasn't easy. But they got them, and they did clean taps too. It's probably the only tap steps they know. And so the number worked very well with that. Actually, you can see it on the Tony Awards, what it would be, 78 Tony Awards, I guess, because I believe it was the opening number for the Tonys, because it was the opening number for the show. Anyway, we finished the first act, and so it was announced that we would have a first act run through on so-and-so day, and of course the writers and the producers and all, they all came. Well, at that time they didn't have 20 or 25 producers, they only had like 3 or 4. And 2 of them were Marty and Mary Lee Richards. and their money came from her. She was of the Johnson and Johnson family. Oh, come on, Larry. I liked him so much. Bobby Fryer was another producer. And so we did the first act run through, and of course, the Porters tap danced in the opening. And so at the end of the run through, they were applauding, and I saw Betty Comden's mouth just about to speak, and Bobby Fryer and Marty Chonin jumped up. Oh, I love the tap dancing in the opening. That's great. Well, she didn't say anything after that, so I got to keep it. So we finished the show, rehearsing it, and we were going out of town. And just before we went out of town, by the way, we were rehearsing at the St. James Theater, where we actually opened. Anyway, there was it was flu season, and there was flu going around, because by then it was the winter of '77, and towards the end of the year. And so the cast was offered flu shots, and you didn't have to have one, but almost everybody got one, including myself. And at that time, evidently, it was a live virus, it wasn't synthetic. So I'm the only one that got sick. I got really sick. I had like 102, 103 temperature, and of course felt rotten. And they were packing up everything and moving to Boston for our out-of-town tryout. And yeah, we still had them then. I couldn't go because I was in bed with fever. So I missed the first 2 days in Boston. But I got there and, did my job. It wasn't, well, it was technically a really difficult show because they had compartments on the train in separate pads that would move on and off the stage, and sometimes there'd be a whole bunch of them come together and you could walk through the train, and we were always having collisions and things, but it got worked out. It was a gorgeous set. Robin Williams, Robin Walton? Robin, come on. He did a chorus line. Robin, no. I'm sorry, Robin. Anyway, he did a great job. And the costumes were terrific, and everybody, it was what they used to refer to as a, what is it? Not slapstick, screwball comedy. Of the late 1930s, early 40s variety. And so it was based on a play and a movie of the same name. Well, we got out of town, and it was very cold in Boston, and we were having some troubles, and in those days, Comden and Green and Cy Coleman and Hal were kind of used to the old way of doing things out of town. If something didn't work, then you wrote another piece for that spot, and you rehearsed it that afternoon, and it went in that night, unless it needed new orchestrations and costumes or something like a big production number. And so Madeline Kahn, who was an experienced Broadway person, I mean, before anybody ever heard of her in Hollywood, she'd done a lot of work, mostly comedy, sketch shows and so on, in New York, both on Broadway and in very nice clubs upstairs at the downstairs and so on. And so she should have been quite used to having a lot of changes very quickly. But Robin Wagner, yes, Robin Wagner was the set designer. Popped into me head. Anyway, she was not comfortable, evidently, because these things were being thrown at her so quickly. And she and Hal were having a little friction, I think, about all that. And also because she would sometimes kind of, pull back on a matinee day or something because she didn't feel she had the energy or something. And she'd do the lower endings to her songs, of course. I always used to rehearse Judy Kay, the understudy, when I would have a production number with that character in it. And so there was a number called Veronique, which was supposed to be a number where she starts to audition for Oscar as an unknown, very young woman with not much experience that he sees great possibilities in. And during the middle of the audition number, it becomes a production number called Veronique, about a feminine hero of France. And they rip off this midi dress that she wore, and underneath it was the Liberté costume, which had supposedly one bare breast, but of course it wasn't bare, and it was quite short. And she had at the end, she had the torch and all that. And after I had set the number with Judy Kay and all of the men in the ensemble, I would teach the staging to, come on, no, this is ridiculous, to the leading lady, and because Madeline would get nervous learning things in front of people. And so once she knew the staging, then I would put her in the number. So we were rehearsing totally alone. She was on the stage at the Colonial in Boston, and it was just her and me and the pianist. And I said, okay, now this is we're at the part where they rip your dress off, and she stood there kind of legged, and she didn't look very kind of sexy feminine. And I said, Madeline, stand on one leg and put the other, and bend the other leg and put your knees together. And she said, why? Beveling, in other words. And she said, why? And I said, because it'll make your legs look better. And she said, my legs? What's the matter with my legs? I knew I shouldn't have let them put me in this costume. It's too brief. And she got so upset. I mean, really, really upset. And she walked off stage. And that was the end of the rehearsal. It was the first really good clue to me that she was scared. She's just scared, really. She wasn't mean. She was just scared. So, and I'm not quite sure why, because as I said, she'd been on Broadway stages before she ever became a movie star. So, anyway, we did get the staging done, but not that day. That was the end of it. And she did write me an apology note, opening night, for her behavior. She had remembered that, and she never apologized, and she did in her note, which I thought was quite nice. Anyway, as I said, she and Hal were kind of not having the greatest time because he was throwing changes at her right and left, and she was out quite a lot. So Judy Kay was on quite a lot. And we saw that Judy played the hell out of it, and she was wonderful in the role. She wasn't a name. And so just put that aside. And we got into New York, And, oh, by the way, Kevin Kline was also in the cast, and he too, nobody had ever heard of at that point. And I remember he would always lay in the side aisle of the theater and do a yoga warm-up before his rehearsal started. I'd never seen an actor do that before. I was very impressed. Anyway, and he was hysterically funny in it, kind of like a fish called Wanda. Anyway, we got into New York. Oh, one other thing before we got into New York. Imogene Coca, bless her lovely heart, I just loved her. She was in it. She played a crazy character lady, and she had a number called Repent. And because she was supposed to be this gung-ho conservative religious woman, she kept putting up signs all over the train. And so her number wasn't landing very well, and Hal kept telling me to go and restage it. So we'd go down to the lounge at the Colonial, no piano, just her and me, and I'd say, okay, you know, come on slower and go off faster. I mean, what else can we do? It's just what it is. And, you know, unless you want to moon them or something. But we didn't go that far, and it didn't stop the show. And I said to Hal, well, can't Compton and Green write her another number? Something that's actually funny? And they said, and he said, oh, no, they can't. And I thought, well, why not? I mean, they're changing everything else. But anyway, she got stuck with that number. And she was a very funny lady if she had the right material. I mean, she made it work, but it wasn't hysterical. So into New York we came, and Madeline was out quite a bit. During previews, she was in opening night, of course, and she sang The High Seas. So again, Judy was on quite often during previews and after previews. And I don't know, about a month or so into the show, into the New York run, we did a cast recording the old-fashioned way. Everybody came in on Sunday, the day off, and recorded the entire album in one day. And so Madeline came in later than most of the ensemble and the other principals, and they did all their stuff before she got there, and then some of it with her after she got there, and then all of them left, and this was getting into the evening, and it was just her and the engineer in the sound booth and Cy Coleman, and Hal had left long before. I mean, he didn't stick around during recordings. He'd just come in and say hello to everybody, have a good day, and leave. But I stayed around all day. And so what we were up to then at the end was that Madeline had not sung any of the high notes for the numbers that she had, the real high ones. So then she had to go into a booth by herself and sing about 8 bars into it, and then she'd give us the high note. And she didn't have to do it many times, but then she came into the sound booth and Cy said, oh, Madeline, it was so terrific, and you sounded great, and you know, he just laid it on. And he played back all the things that we needed on the recording, and she said, well, I don't know, no, my throat is really feeling strange now. I don't know. And she left she had a young man with her. We didn't see her at the theater for 10 days. She was out. And I can't remember if it was before she came back or right after she came back. I think it was before. the producers evidently got to her agent and management and said, Miss Khan does not have to return to the show. We are giving the role to Judy Kaye. And and we never saw her again. But they had to pay her. She had a contract, so she got paid for that year. I'm sure she did. But it was unfortunate because she was just her own worst enemy. She was just scared and, you know, a bit anxious about everything, paranoid. Anyway, Judy took it over and did a fabulous job, stayed in the show until it closed the out-of-town run. And Judy had been in the show in a very small role. She played Lily Garland's maid, and she was only in a couple of scenes. So when she went into the role, then they had to replace Judy as the maid and the understudy. And Christine Ebersole got cast. So Christine Ebersole was now the understudy. Anyway, when we went on the, that year, it did not win the Tony Award as Best Musical. God, what was that songbook thing with Nell Carter and...
Oh, Ain't Misbehavin'? Ain't Misbehavin'?
Ain't Misbehavin', yeah. Ain't Misbehavin' won the Best Musical that year. And practically everybody on the creative team of On the 20th Century won, but it didn't win Best Musical. And I didn't even get nominated because there was so little dancing, and I was the new boy in town. Nobody knew who the hell I was. So I was not invited to the Tony Awards. Anyway, while we were doing rehearsing On the 20th Century, and I remember Hal very well. I don't know, I think it was after we came back during previews and rehearsals in the theater. He would be sitting there on breaks working on the lyrics of Evita, because by that time he had agreed to do it. So that was to come up very shortly after On the 20th Century in London first. So he would sit there with the script, which was really just pages of lyrics from the original concept album, and he would make that into a script, the lyrics, and figure out how to bridge from one thing to the other to the other. So I knew he was working on it, but then at one point, and I can't remember now whether it was before we left town or after we came back, he asked if I would like to choreograph it. Yes! And I mean, he waited a while, I must say. And I said to him, you know, Hal, why did you find me, of all people, so interesting and really kind of keep track of what I was doing in Europe? And he even came to see one thing that I did when he was over there scouting locations for Little Night Music, which absolutely stunned me. But he did. He came to old Kaiserslautern Opera House and saw Girl Crazy.
We have a couple of questions.
Hmm?
We have a couple of questions on the 20th Century.
Are we done?
No, but there's some good questions here. Did you ever stage numbers with Hal? Did you help out with numbers like the Sextet, or did you help stage She's a Nut in any way?
Hal and I sometimes crossed over in that way, yes, especially in Evita. Not as much in On the 20th Century. Or he'd give it a kind of skeletal form, and then he'd say, take it over and finish it. Because he was very I was kind of saving that for Evita, but he was really very, very good to collaborate with, director to choreographer, because other directors I had worked with prior to Hal, for the most part, just said, oh, you're the choreographer, take the dancers in the other room and do some steps. I mean, they weren't interested in sharing a concept or what they wanted out of the number. But I'll get into that on Evita. Yes, we did collaborate on a number.
And then was Cy Coleman, what was Cy Coleman like during the creation of this show?
Cy Coleman was one of the sweethearts of Broadway. He was such a nice man. Always had a smile, always pleasant, and always talented. He always came up with whatever you needed, and rather quickly. I cannot praise him more.
And then do you remember anything of the cut song from Boston, This Is the Moment?
I remember the title now. That was, wait a minute. That was from Dr. Jekyll and Mr.
Jekyll and Hyde. There's a song called that, yes. Those are questions from Colden Lamb.
Well, I don't remember This Is the Moment from On the 20th Century, I don't think. I suppose if I heard it, I would, but I don't remember it right now. Sorry.
That's all right. Got about 2 minutes. Got about 2 minutes.
Okay, well, where the hell was I? You interrupted my train of fabulous thought. Anyway, Judy had taken over, and Hal had asked me to do Evita. And so, one thing I did want to say. When we were in Boston, over the holidays and into January and so on, my birthday happens to be January 22nd, and when we were in Boston, it was January 22nd, and it was my 40th birthday. And I was taken out to dinner by Hal Prince, Betty Comden, Adolph Green, and Cy Coleman. And I was sitting there at the dinner table thinking, life really does begin at 40. It was amazing to me. Again, little boy from Rolla, Missouri, look at you now. I guess that's kind of it on the, yes. For the national tour, Rock Hudson played Oscar, and Judy Kaye stayed on as Lily. And Rock Hudson was a really nice man, very, very nice. I mean, we rehearsed, and I could probably have asked him to stand on his head and spin, and he would have tried it. But he really wasn't much of a stage actor. It wasn't a great presence on stage. He was a wonderful film actor, but he played it, and I'm sure he brought a lot of people in.
Colden Lamb says he corrected himself. He says, I think it was called This Is My Moment.
Oh, yes. Yes, now I remember. That was Oscar's song.
And do you remember anything of that song, about that song, or why it was cut? Or
Now he's saying This Is the Day.
I think it was just...
or This Is the Day.
And it was cut song.
And who sang it? Do
you know who sang it, Colden?
I mean, what character?
Or what character?
Probably. How did he find out about it? Was it on the album?
He's a Broadway freak. He knows everything about every show ever written.
Anyway.
It's like Lily.
He's worse than me.
He said it was Lily's song.
Oh. Well.
This is the Day.
It might have been replaced by Never, which was her big song to Oscar about how she would never, ever work with him again. But I think that's what happened, but I'm not sure. You have something else?
No.
Nobody wants to ask me more. Okay, well.
All right.
Next week, we're into Evita. So that gets really interesting. And There's loads and loads of stories about that. I don't even know if I'll be able to do it in one 30-minute segment.
We may have to extend that one a little bit. All right, guys. Well, we will see you then on Tuesday. Remember, next week, Tuesday and Thursday, those are the last 2 installments. So they might be a little longer. We might go to 40 minutes next Tuesday and Thursday. So.
And also, be sure to remember the Actors Fund if you can spare anything, even $5.
Yeah, there will be a link on this in about a half hour when we finish it up and post it and share it. There'll be a link to the Actors Fund so you can make a donation to Larry's name if you are so inclined. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We will see you on Thursday at 2 o'clock Pacific time.
Ciao.
Take care.